I've been saying it for a while now that I think the next wave of indie shooters we're going to be getting are the hyper-violent, stylish gun-free variety, much in the same vein as games like Max Payne 2 and the Fear series. Well, Severed Steel is definitely another one to add to that list, along with upcoming titles like Sulaco, Trepang 2 and Get to the Orange Door. And if you're after an enjoyable, addictive FPS that lets you harass and bully unfortunate soldiers over and over, well then I've got good news for you, because Severed Steel's going to be right up your alley. Now look, first things first, this game isn't currently even out yet, but it is going to be released on Steam in Early Access, I think sometime in the future. In the meantime, the developer, Greylock Studios, been kind enough to let me play through a pretty early build of the game and give my impressions on it. So this also means you can expect to see a fair few bugs and glitches, right? I'm not saying this thing is perfect. I mean, that should go without saying, but you'd be surprised at the amount of people out there that are desperate for fodder to use against me. And because the gaming industry's been about as dry as a kangaroo's nutsack lately, and I'm always keen for any kind of new FPS, I thought it would be fun to check the whole thing out. Considering all of the preview footage I've seen on social media for this thing has just looked awesome. Well, if Severed Steel is crack, consider me a crackhead, because I have to say that after spending 10 or so hours playing this thing, I'm pretty damn excited as to what the future's gonna bring. Now, there's no real story or premise in this current version of the game outside of the fact that you're playing as a one-armed woman named Steel, hence the title.
It wasn't me, it was the one-armed man.
And I think it might actually be the first FPS game where you've ever played as someone with a physical disability.
Alright, I confess.
Anyway, all you're really doing here is playing through a short tutorial to learn the ropes, before then being able to blast through a bunch of arcade maps over and over, unlocking new starting weapons as you level up. Don't let that put you off though, because you'll unlock all of the maps and the weapons within, honestly, I think 1 to 2 hours. And then after that, I hit the max level of 50 within another couple more. You can probably tell just by looking at this thing that this ain't gonna be your standard retro throwback shooter thrown together in the Unreal or the Unity engine. I mean, ironically, this thing does run on the Unreal 4 engine, but it's still got this really cool aesthetic. It's kind of like a combination of a military shooter with these enemies decked out in tactical gear, combined with these more virtual looking environments like it's kinda been ripped straight out of Tron. The particle effects combined with these very arcadey looking pop-ups during combat give the game a visually noisy but still unique appearance, topped off with a decent soundtrack that manages to emphasize the action without being overbearing. Look, all I'm trying to say is I'm picking up what they're putting down. If you're prone to seizures though, or other things brought on by flashing lights and bright imagery, well then you might want to take a backseat with this one, because once this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit. Nothing else though, it is kinda nice to play an indie shooter that just doesn't use pixel art or try to look like the Quake engine for a change. Now, you've got 4 difficulty modes here, Cold Steel and Tempered Steel, which are basically easy and normal mode. Both being kind of easy though, and look, I'm not trying to gatekeep or difficulty shame people by saying that, it's just they're kind of there for messing around with and acting out your best John Woo power fantasies. The eponymous Severed Steel difficulty mode though is apparently the way you're supposed to play the game, where you're gonna need to use all of the tricks of the trade to just survive. Then you've got the Molten Steel mode, which is just kind of a joke where you die in a single hit. And you know what? The amount of stuff that you can pull off in this game is pretty damn extensive, and once you get the hang of the controls, it just becomes second nature. Your movement speed to begin with is pretty fast, but that doesn't mean you can outrun bullets. So what you do to counter this is the abundance of stunt moves. Stunt moves are things like sliding, wall running, and diving. And the idea here is that you combine all of these together along with shooting everyone in the face to kill every enemy on the level and then get the highest score possible. You can even pull an enemy's sidearm right out of its holster and then just shoot them with it. In fact, sliding past someone, stealing their gun, and immediately shooting them right in the face became a bit of a favourite tactic of mine. If an enemy dies and drops their weapon, you can even slide past the weapon, pick it up, and then keep on firing. They've even unlocked the vertical access when aiming, letting you pull off some pretty damn incredible looking moves. Combined of course with the bullet time mechanic, which still somehow manages to look impressive despite it being one of the most overused features I think in all of gaming. Then of course you've got your character's mighty boot, and look, if a game doesn't give you the ability to kick someone in the face, well then it's really not worth playing. What the game doesn't outright tell you either is that the dive move can also be kinda used as a double jump, even completely changing your trajectory in midair, which makes no sense but still kinda cool. You've got standard enemies, there's guys with riot shields, heavier armored dudes that can jump around, and watching the way these enemies can dynamically adapt to what you're doing adds a whole heap of replayability. And you also get a pretty satisfying sound effect when you kill someone, so you can stop shooting and not waste needless ammo on a corpse. Unless of course you like shooting a corpse over and over. I mean, I'm not judging. As you finish levels, you earn points and level up, and about all that's good for in this current build is just unlocking new starting guns and maps to play with. If you really want to, you can start off unarmed, but that only really lasts about all of 3 seconds until you steal a weapon off someone's holster anyway. There's a heavy pistol which kinda looks like a Desert Eagle, there's a MAC-10 submachine gun, then there's the shotgun which is laughably overpowered, and that's something I'm all for. I mean look, if your shotgun doesn't send someone to the Shadow Realm with a single point blank range blast, can you even call it a shotgun? Even the loadout menu describes this weapon as overpowered. This is a positive thing. Then there's a couple of more interesting weapons. You've got an Instajib rifle, which kills everything in a single hit, which almost kind of feels like cheating. Then you've got the arm cannon, which I'm guessing has to be based off Samus's cannon from the Metroid games. But this one's actually really interesting because it's one of the few ways that you can destroy the environment, as this thing leaves giant impact holes in whatever you hit. Let me tell you, the last time I saw a hole that big was when your mother bent over to do some vacuuming. Schwacked. I think it's by far the most fun weapon in the current build of the game. Plus you can just mess around with the AI in this thing in some really creative ways. It's a shame they haven't added in any other options to tear apart the levels yet. I think the lack of grenades or rocket launchers is a bit of a bummer, but hopefully that's the kind of thing they're looking at adding back in future releases. Speaking of future releases, I suppose I should talk about the things I hope to see in future updates, and more importantly things they improve. For starters, wall running at the moment seems really temperamental, and I just never really found a consistent way to make sure my character would do it. It's really kind of frustrating to have this idea of where you want to go next, knowing that you need to wall run across something to get there, and then for steel to just not attach yourself to the wall and just fall to the ground. Sometimes too, even when you're wall running and sliding around like an idiot, you're still taking damage from enemy gunfire. And this I don't understand, because I thought that was the one defense you had against taking hits. I really do also think the kick reach length isn't long enough. Feels like I'm trying to kick someone with a stump instead of a leg sometimes. You can actually kind of see it in some of my footage where I go for a kick and then move on, because in my head I assume that that kick was a direct hit, but then it's like I do a bit of a double take and try again. This mechanic of ammo left in a weapon being based off the color on the side of the gun is also a terrible idea. Look, I'm colorblind and that shit to me is fucking confusing. Just give me an ammo counter. I mean, look guys, you don't need to worry about trying to make this minimal, unobtrusive HUD in the same game where weapon combos and point scores are popping up every 2 seconds, and it sounds more like you're playing a pinball machine. But I think the absolute biggest problem going ahead with this thing is going to be the map design, because the flow of these is going to make or break how much fun you're going to have. And the long and short of it, I think, is that some of the maps here just don't let you play around with the mechanics as much as you'd kind of want to. If you look at one of the main games that this thing's obviously heavily influenced by, it's got to be Fear. That's a very similar game that also lets you approach each combat sequence from often multiple different angles. And I think that all of the best combat arenas in the game were the ones that let you initiate combat, as well as let you choose when you wanted to initiate it. This though isn't always the case for Severed Steel. The first one you're going to play is called Waste Management. Now this one's alright. There's a few structures you can use for cover and multiple ways the enemy can attack you. But you'll probably almost always end up in this final structure on the other side of the level, because the last surviving enemy always seems to hide in this little building. So it almost always ends in the same way. The next one's called Food Processing, and this is like a series of rooms above, like, I guess a conveyor belt or something. And this one almost kind of has to be played in a very specific order. Kind of like a backwards S shape going from room to room. Because if you skip any of these rooms, you're just gonna have to go back later and kill these guys anyway. The next one, Administration, I think is honestly the best map in the game right now, and the one that I literally spent hours playing alone. This is how it should be. I mean, not only does it feel like a deathmatch map, with lots of different rooms and options to break line of sight, but it also gives the AI the option to adapt to whatever you're doing. Seeing as you can also initiate combat from a couple of different directions, instead of just having to go through the door in front of you, it also becomes a lot more dynamic. And then because there's all these walls to break line of sight and you're not always out in the open, it also means you don't have to spam that slide move over and over just to avoid taking a hit. You'll really start to see how important this is when you start playing on hard mode, where enemies are going to shred you in seconds. Silo is again another pretty linear map, and again it's been designed in a way that kinda forces you to play it in a specific order. This time you're moving down from floor to floor, down a series of stairways all the way to the bottom. And in each room you've got a bunch of enemies in your way. Outside there's a few guys on jetpacks too, and you can even jump out the window right to the bottom if you really want to. But again, it's kinda pointless, because you're just gonna have to go back up floor to floor getting those stragglers that you missed along the way. 3 of the other maps, Cafeteria, Infirmary, and Service Corridor, are all kind of the same deal too. Starting you off in a singular room and then not really offering up many options to deviate off it. Infirmary, you start off in an elevator, stopping at the first floor each time, and I don't even think it's possible to skip this floor without being attacked. And the only way to get back to this floor is from the elevator itself, so every playthrough is going to require you to clear this area first before moving on. Capiche? Service Corridor, I think, is definitely the weakest map in the game so far though. It again forces you through this singular room at the beginning, then throws you into this larger opened up area on the second floor, which is just a bit of a mess. Cafeteria, though it does start off in the same couple of rooms, at least offers up some wall running and diving when you get into the main combat area, so it ain't all that bad. But it also features the most annoying motherfuckers in the entire game, the guys with shields. The other map that I really liked was the one called Food Storage, which again, like the administration level, just kind of felt like a deathmatch map to me. You start off undetected and you've again got multiple ways to approach it. You've got an upper and a lower area, and then even on those upper levels, there's platforms on both sides giving you multiple routes to take. There's a lot of options for wall running, and the dive move comes in handy to get from one side of the platform to the other. And it just encapsulates every element that makes Severed Steel so much fun. Now look, I don't want to make it sound like these maps make the game bad, because that couldn't be further from the truth. The combat loop in this thing is so insanely fun, even with this little content, but it just kind of feels like it pigeonholes the player into a very specific route with certain maps, and delineating off that path just means you have to backtrack and kill everything you've missed. I guess my point of what I'm trying to say here is that in a game that's all about making your own fun, the map design here can really make that easier or harder. And hopefully too, the community content's going to bring some awesome maps to the table too. In fact, there's actually a map maker included with the game, but I'm buggered if I know how to use it. I have also noticed some minor issues with the hit detection at times, which I think comes from the fact that you're really playing a third-person shooter from a first-person perspective, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's one of those games where if you look down you'll see your own legs and torso, and this means that whatever your crosshair is on isn't necessarily what you're actually going to be hitting sometimes. Because it's kind of like the view you're getting doesn't always take your body's proportions into consideration. But I think that at the moment, for what's really not that much more than a proof of concept, Severed Steel is still pretty damn awesome. And I'm really hoping that the devs can see this thing through to completion. Add in a bunch more maps, maybe include some kind of basic story or premise, and let us go even crazier with more outlandish weapons and abilities. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.